do you mention Hanukkah in the Musaf? Meaning to say, we know we met Al Hanisim. Hanukkah means Al Hanisim. We know we have a mitzvah and a chiyuv, a responsibility to mention Al Hanisim in the Amidah of Shachrit in Chan Arvit. We said, Rashi says that that's part of the enactments of Hanukkah. We know you have to light the menorah, you have to read Hallel, and you have to say Al Hanisim. Al Hanisim in Hodah, and Nisim you have to say. The question is, Musaf, which is not a regular prayer on Hanukkah, it's an additional prayer on Hanukkah, which is coming because of it on the Rosh Chodesh Hanukkah or on the Shabbat Hanukkah. So now the question of the Gemara was, do you have to say Al Nisim in the Musaf of Hanukkah? And we brought different opinions. We brought Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda that say you do not need to mention it. Rav Nachman and Rav Yochanan that say you do need to mention it. And the Gemara was trying to, Rabbi was bringing the source for the reason why you do not have to mention it. And the Gemara said his source is not, we questioned his source. And therefore the Gemara says back, El Hadamya. Rather, we have a different ruling of Rav, which would support the opinion of Huna and of Yehuda, that do not require the recitation of Al Hanisim in the Musaf of Chanukah. That's 24a3 in the art scroll. The right bottom. Ela lahadamya. It's comparable to the following case. The Omar Rav Achtavoy, Omar Rav Matna, Omar Rav. Achtavoy says the name of Rav Matna in the name of Rav. Yom Tov shachal liot b'Shabbat. I think we just touched this on Friday. Yom Tov that comes down on Shabbat, right? So what do we do by Yom Tov that comes down on Shabbat? So hamaftir bin Navi bin Mincha b'Shabbat. So let's say today was Shabbat. Not only today was Shabbat, today was also Pesach. Now, on a regular Mincha of Pesach, on Shachrit, we have Musaf, we have Kriyat Torah, we have Haftorah, but on a regular Yom Tov day, we do not have by Mincha, we don't have any Haftorah, correct, Simon? No Haftorah by Mincha. But in the old days, on Shabbat Mincha, there was Haftorah. Rashi says he found from the Gonim, they would read the Navi, the prophets, like we read Shabbat day, in additional to Shabbat day, at Mincha, Shabbat afternoon, they would get 3 aliyot, plus they would read Haftorah. Yom Kippur. Like Yom Kippur, like the Mincha Yom Kippur. They did it every Shabbat. Tosfos takes issue. Tosfos says we have a Gemara Megillah that says that on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat, Monday and Thursday, we have 3 aliyot in the morning. And Shabbat Mincha, we have 3 aliyot. And there's no Navi. That's Tosfos, the bottom Tosfos asks the question, how do we say that there was Navi when it says there in the Gemara Megillah that there was no Navi by Mincha Shabbat? The Tosfos says that by the time when we say Navi here, we don't mean exactly. The prophets mean the Ketuvim. The Ketuvim, let's say, Kehelet, Mishlei, those are Ketuvim. Shirim, that's what we read by Mincha and Shabbat. There was such a custom to do that. But they didn't actually read from the prophets, but they read from the Ketuvim. Okay. But there was originally such a custom. So now the question is, if it's Yom Tov and it's Shabbat, because of Shabbat, I'm going to read, in those days they would read at Mincha the Navi, or the Ketuvim. Nothing to do with Yom Tov. Yom Tov, Mincha and Yom Tov, they would not read the Ketuvim or the Navi. Shabbat Mincha. But now, because it's Shabbat Mincha, now of course, Shabbat Mincha, you would talk about when you make a bracha on the Haftorah. Just like on Shabbat, when you make a bracha, when you read the Haftorah on Shabbat, after you read the Haftorah, we say brachot, and it mentions about Shabbat. So would you need to mention in the bracha and Haftorah by Mincha of Yom Tov that comes down on Shabbat, would you have to mention Yom Tov in the bracha and the blessing of the Haftorah? Would you have to mention Yom Tov? What's the question? Good morning, Asaf. Because the Haftorah has nothing to do with Yom Tov. It's not the Haftorah coming to the table, this extra reading of the Navi or the Ketuvim Shabbat Mincha is not because of Yom Tov. It's only because of Shabbat. So would you need, if something that's there, not because of the Yom Tov, but it happens to be Yom Tov, do you have to mention today is Yom Tov? And what does it say over there? And Rav Achtuvoy says, you do not have to mention, you do not need to mention Yom Tov. Why? She'el Malay Shabbat ain't Navi b'mincha b'Yom Tov. If there wouldn't be Shabbat, there wouldn't be any if it's not Shabbat, you don't bring the Navi. The whole Navi is coming to the table because of Shabbat. So therefore you don't have to mention Yom Tov. You don't mention the Yom Tov, meaning when you pray on Yom Tov and it's Shabbat, on the Shachrit prayer, you have to mention Yom Tov. Because Yom Tov has every Yom Tov has a prayer that you have to go ahead and mention the holiday. You have to talk about today's Yom Tov. But every Yom Tov does not have a Shabbat. But it happens to be this Yom Tov came out on Shabbat. Now, do you need to mention the fact that today is Yom Tov in the blessing of the Haftorah? So it says you do not need to. So why? Because it's the Haftorah that you're reading on the Shabbat, Mincha of Yom Tov has nothing to do, it's not because of Yom Tov. Yom Tov does not bring a Haftorah. And yet you still, and it says you do not need to mention it. So if you do not need to mention it, the Gemara wants to say, so too, the Gemara says you do not need to mention Chanukah al Anisim in the Musaf. Good morning, Nathan. According to that, you would not need to mention al Anisim in the Musaf of Chanukah, because the Musaf is not coming because of Chanukah. The Musaf is coming because today is Rosh Chodesh or today is Shabbat. That's what the Gemara wanted to say. And then to that, the Gemara says, what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, the Gemara says the law does not follow what we've said until now, the opinions until now, which rather, Ella, the Gemara says, what does the halacha follow? Ki had Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Now we're turning the page. We are now on 24b, 1. The Gemara says, what is the law? Listen to the case. Yom Kippurim shechal liyot b'Shabbat. Yom Kippur came out on Shabbat. So it's Yom Kippur and it's Shabbat. Hamitpalel ni'ilah. So when you pray ni'ilah, now what ni'ilah is the extra prayer. Ni'ilah is the language of na'ol, to lock up, to close. It's the closing of the holiday of Yom Kippur. It's the end of the holiday. We close with ni'ilah. It's the last prayer. It's a special additional prayer that we say on Yom Kippur. Every Shabbat we don't have ni'ilah, right? There's no ni'ilah on Shabbat, only because of Yom Kippur. Now, so when you say ni'ilah on Shabbat of Yom Kippur, do you have to have an insert to mention, by the way, today is Shabbat? Do you need to mention the idea that, about today? You have to talk about the fact that today is Shabbat. When it's Yom Kippur in the ni'ilah, with the whole ni'ilah prayer is only coming because of what? Because of Yom Kippur. It's not coming because of Shabbat. Anam, is it clear the case? So what does it say? That last prayer says Yom Kippur shechal liyot b'Shabbat. Hamitpalel ni'ilah, the person who prays ni'ilah, sarich lahaskir shel Shabbat. He has to mention Shabbat in ni'ilah. He has to say something about today is Shabbat. Why Yom Hu shenetchayav ba'arba tefillot. It's a day that's obligated in 4 tefillot. Meaning to say, 20 miles. The Shachrit that day, there's also the 5th prayer, the Arvit the night before, but we're talking about the day of Yom Kippurim. How many prayers we do in the day of Shachrit? Musaf, Mincha, Ilah, so means Arvit from the night before. So that's the 5. That's why the Gemara counts here 4 prayers. But it's 4 prayers on the day of Yom Kippur itself. Shachrit, Musaf, Mincha, and Ilah. This day is obligated in 4 prayers. So if this day is obligated in 4 prayers, Therefore, on this day, you need to mention Shabbat in every prayer. Even though the Ne'ilah is not here because of Shabbat. The only reason why you're praying Ne'ilah is because today is Yom Kippur. But even though the Ne'ilah is not coming because today is Shabbat, Ne'ilah is only coming because today is Yom Kippur. The only reason why Ne'ilah is coming because of Yom Kippur. But the end of the day is today you have to mention Shabbat. When you have a responsibility to pray, that responsibility of prayer requires a mentioning of Shabbat in your prayer. Even if the prayer is here not because of Shabbat, it's because of Yom Kippur. But therefore the Gemara wants to say the same thing with Musaf of Hanukkah. The Musaf of Hanukkah, because it happens to be the 5th day of Hanukkah, is Rosh Chodesh. Right? I mean, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th. Sorry, the 6th day of Hanukkah is Rosh Chodesh. The 6th day of Hanukkah is Rosh Chodesh. Right? So because the 6th day, every Hanukkah of the 6th day is Rosh Chodesh. The only reason why you're praying Musaf on Rosh Chodesh Hanukkah is because why? It's because of, not because of Hanukkah. It's because it's Rosh Chodesh. But since on Rosh Chodesh you have an obligation to say Musaf, Hanukkah, you have to mention Hanukkah on all the prayers of the day. Just like you have to mention Shabbat on all the prayers of Yom Kippur, even if the prayer of the Ne'ilah has nothing to do with Shabbat, you have to mention it. Because in the prayers where you're obligated to pray, you have to mention that what today is. Today, mention, recognize today's date, what today is. So too by Hanukkah, it's a day that you're obligated in Musaf and Shachrit. You have to go ahead and mention Hanukkah in the Musaf. That's what the Gemara concludes over here. The question is, what about, let's say, the thing that we just mentioned before about in those days by Maftir ben Navi, when they would have the Navi on Shabbat Mincha, and you would be reading the Navi Shabbat Mincha, and it came out on Yom Tov, would we say the same thing, that you would need to mention in the bracha of the Haftorah, you would have to mention that today is Yom Tov, even though the Haftorah is not coming because of Yom Tov, it's only coming because of Shabbat. So that's a matter of discussion between Rashi and Tosfot. Rashi equates it. He says the same way that by Ne'ilah on Yom Kippurim you need to mention Shabbat in the Ne'ilah, because today is the day that we have the prayer of Ne'ilah, and you have to mention Shabbat. So too, you have to mention Chanukah and Al Hanisim in the Musaf, and so too, you have to mention Yom Tov in the Haftorah of Mincha by Shabbat. But Tosfos takes issue. Tosfos says that because there's no Navi on Rosh Chodesh, Tosfos says, no, I'm not in this case. Tosfos says on a different case. But Tosfos would agree, meaning Rashi, we would agree with that point that on Mincha, on Shabbat Mincha, you would have to mention Shabbat Mincha of Yom Tov, you would have to mention Yom Tov in the bracha of the Haftorah. But what Tosfos takes issue was Rashi also mentioned Rav Gidul. That Rashi says that we do not follow Rav Gidul. Rav Gidul said about Rosh Chodesh. What about if Rosh Chodesh comes down on Shabbat? Right? That was the question we had on Friday. Next week. Right. Exactly. When Rosh Chodesh comes down on Shabbat, when you mention the Haftorah, we're going to do Haftorah on Rosh Chodesh, and we're going to say the brachot. We're going to say the blessings on the Haftorah. The blessings of Torah, of course, talk about Shabbat. Are we going to make any insert that, by the way, and B'yom Rosh HaChodesh Atet? We're not going to make that insert on Haftorah. Why? Because Tosfos says Rosh Chodesh never has Navi. Rosh Chodesh never brings Navi to the table. You have Rosh Chodesh during the weekdays, it doesn't bring Haftorah to the table. So therefore, if we say Haftarah on Rosh Chodesh, we're not going to eat, because the only reason we're saying Haftarah on Rosh Chodesh, there's no precedent of Haftarah coming for Rosh Chodesh. The only reason why we're going to say Haftarah on Rosh Chodesh, but it happens to be, it's a Shabbat. Good morning, Nathan. Or happens to be, a Yom Tov of, but we're not going to say Haftarah because of Rosh Chodesh itself, and therefore, we do not mention, Tosa says, we will not mention, there's never a Navi on Rosh Chodesh. In contrast to Yom Tov, there is a Navi on Yom Tov. So therefore, when Shabbat Mincha of Yom Tov, you can also mention that today is Yom Tov and Shabbat Mincha of Yom Tov. But on Rosh Chodesh, comes down on Shabbat, like Miles said, this coming Shabbat, it's going to be Rosh Chodesh. We're not going to mention the fact in the Haftorah, we're not going to mention the fact that today is Rosh Chodesh in the actual blessings of the Haftorah. So the Gemara says, but according to Rashi would hold you would, and our custom is following Tosfot. So the Gemara says the following: Kasha hilchata hilchata. We have now a apparent contradiction between the halacha this halacha and the next halacha. We're in the second paragraph of 24b1. What's the contradiction? Amrit hilchata Rabbi Shmuel Levi. You told me the law follows Rabbi Shmuel Levi, which means that Yom Kippurim that comes down on Shabbat, when you pray Ne'ilah, you need to mention Shabbat in the Ne'ilah, even though the Ne'ilah service, that Amidah of Ne'ilah is not coming because of Shabbat, it's coming because of Yom Kippurim. Excuse me, but you still have to mention Ne'ilah, you have to mention Shabbat and Ne'ilah. But I have a different question. The Amar Rava, Kasha Hilchata Hilchata. Let's see it again. Amrit Hilchata Rabbi Shmuel Levi. You told me the law follows Rabbi Shmuel Levi, but the Kaimal Hilchata Rava. We have another halacha that's like Rava, which seems on surface to be a contradiction to Shmuel Levi. Dama Rava. What did Rava say? Yom Tov shachal liot b'Shabbat. Yom Tov that comes down on Shabbat. Shliach Tzibur hayur lefnei teva arvit. So Yom Tov comes on every Friday night. What do we do on Friday night in the Amidah? The Chazan has and if you want to send to the group, we'll take even the last few minutes of people coming. Every minute counts, right? The Chazan, Friday night, he has something called a Brechat Me'in Sheva. It's like a mini repetition of the Amidah. The Amidah, the prayer of Friday night, is a 7 blessing prayer, to bless you. And we have a cliff note, or whatever you call it. We have a small abridged of this, just like we have on the Ala Michya bracha, is called the Brechat Me'in Shalosh. It resembles the 3 brachot, the brachot of Birkat HaMazon. It's called the bracha Me'in. It's a 3 blessing bracha before you get to the Amen, right? The Amen ends the 3 blessing. Because that's the biblical brachot, and then you have the extra bracha that was later added afterwards, which is called the bracha tova meitiv. So this bracha is like chazara. It's like chazarat hashatz. It's like the chazar of the chazan, and that's called. Now, what do we do on Friday night? We mentioned it. What about a regular Yom Tov? Yom Tov. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avoteinu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak Elokei Yaakov. This is how the Ashkenazim say it. Right? That's the Friday night Brechat Me'in Sheva. Now, if Yom Tov would be tonight, on a Monday night, and with davening Arvid, we do not say this. We do not say this on a Monday night Yom Tov. Friday night, we say it. Now the question is, Friday night is Yom Tov. We're going to say it. But the question is, do we mention in that prayer, and that when we say it, that today is Yom Tov? Do we say, we're going to mention Shabbat, we're going to say say Navim Nuchatenu, Kadesh Shabbat. But are we going to mention today is Yom Tov Chag HaSukkot as the answer is we don't mention it. If Friday night comes down to Yom Tov, the only thing we ever changed, if you look in, is that during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, instead of saying Hakel HaKadosh, we say Hamelech HaKadosh. They're not really changing anything real and really significantly. It's an important change, but we're not mentioning. We're just mentioning. It's saying the word Hamelech HaKadosh instead of Hakel HaKadosh. But during this 10 days of awe, 10 days of penitence, of repentance, we focus on Hashem as the King. That's why we say Hamelech HaKadosh, and we add that Melech HaMishpat. So therefore, we're going to say, but we don't mention Yom Tov in that, even though it's going to be Yom Tov tonight. If Friday night would be Yom Tov, we're not going to mention in the Amidah. We're going to mention today's Yom Tov, right? We'll have actually a Yom Tov Amidah with insert about Shabbat. But here we're not going to mention Yom Tov in this, right? Adam, this is this blessing. We're not going to mention Yom Tov. We're not going to mention Yom Tov in that blessing. So now you just told me that Ne'ilah and Shabbat, you do mention Shabbat, even though that Ne'ilah Amidah has nothing. It's not here because of Shabbat. So why don't we mention Yom Tov in this blessing? Because this blessing is not here because of Yom Tov. It's only here because of Shabbat. If that's the case, so we have a apparent contradiction. Why, when it comes to Ne'ilah, you have to mention Shabbat? When it comes to Yom Tov that comes out on Shabbat, on the Friday night, you don't need to mention Yom Tov in that prayer of the Birkat Me'en Sheva, of that Mogen Avot Bevaro Machayim Meitim Ba'amoro, which is part of that bracha. So the Gemara says fascinating the following. Okay, so I'll just read you the case. The Amar Rava said, Yom Tov Shechal Yot B'Shabbat, Shliach Tzibur HaYored Lefnei HaTeva, the Chazan that goes down in front of the bima, he goes down because, why did he go down? Because the custom was that the place where the Chazan stood was lower. Many shuls have the Chazan is on a platform that's raised up. But the custom was that the Chazan goes down. It was a lower area because we say Mimamakim. Correct. We call it Hashem from the depths. So they go from a lower place. In the Agudat Yisrael of Baltimore, Rabbi Heinemann, when they built it, that actually they go down. The Chazan in Baltimore, in his shul, in the Agudat.
The Torah down also, or no?
No. Just.
So the Chazan is down, but the Torah is at least
right.
Flat or up.
Right. The Chazan is on a lower place than anybody else in the shul. And it's interesting thing to see. That's how they built it. They made under his design that it should be that way, and it fits with the Gemara. That's what the Gemara says. He would go down in front of the teva. If it's a Friday night Yom Tov, you will not mention Yom Tov. He doesn't need to mention. Shil Malish, meaning Shil Malish might not be an interruption. Might have a right to the language. We could, it's questionable, but there's room to say. Not paskening, but room to say he doesn't have to mention, but it's not an interruption because it's not called something that it's something that you're not talking about the Yankees, which will be an interruption in the middle of them. Then you talk about today's Yom Tov, so it's not like, but you don't need to mention Yom Tov. Shel Malay Shabbat, because it wouldn't be Shabbat, Ein Shel Sibur, Yom Tov. It does not go down, Arvit, Yom Tov. It has to go down to say this Chazara. So the Gemara says Hachi Hashta. So the Chazan goes down to say them Arvit, but he will not. But on regular Yom Tov, he doesn't go down to say. The Gemara may say to say the Chazara, to say this bracha. He doesn't go down to say this Mei Sheva. Correct.
Doesn't go down.
Right. He doesn't go down on a regular Yom Tov. On a regular Yom Tov, there's no right, and therefore now.
Say it at all, but on Shabbat.
On Shabbat.
Go down for being Shabbat.
Yes, but now he could go down, but he doesn't need to mention Yom Tov because the blessing has nothing to do with Yom Tov. It's not here because of Yom Tov. So the Gemara answers Hachi Hashta. The Gemara says you can't compare the two. Hatam bidinhu really dafilu b'Shabbat nami lo tzarich. Really, you should not really. It's not something like Shachrit and Mincha, where the Rabbi Chachamim obligated us to do a chazara out loud, to be motzi, to cover anybody who's not a baki, right? The rabbis instituted chazara, that you have to go ahead, it has a chazan, needs to go ahead and repeat the Amidah out loud to cover anybody in the synagogue who does not know how to pray, right? That's what the rabbis instituted. But the rabbis did not institute that for Arvit. Arvit, the rabbis never instituted Chazara. And therefore, really, the same way on a... Why? Because originally, Arvit, once upon a time, was Rishut, was not the same level of obligation, it was a mitzvah. It was always a mitzvah to pray the Amidah, as Tosfos points out in the Gemara Brachot, but it was not the same level of obligation. Eventually, we accepted upon ourselves that Arvit, the Midah, is an obligation like the other prayers. But since originally they did not, it was not that level of obligation, therefore they did not obligate us to repeat the Amidah, Chazarat Hashatz. But, so why are we, meaning on a regular Sunday, Monday night, does the Chazan say anything? Is there any bracha after the lachash? After we daven, everyone davens quietly, the Chazan doesn't say anything extra. Only Friday night is the Chazan go up and the Chazan says this extra blessing. Why? Hatan b'din afil b'shabbat nami lo tzarich. Rabbanan hu d'dakini mishum sakana. The rabbis, they instituted this because of sakana, danger. What was the danger? People would come to the fields late, in the fields. We didn't want them to be left alone on Friday night, be alone in the synagogue. So a guy, if I came late to synagogue, come late to shul synagogue, it's not a new thing. Back in the Gemara's time, they're already concerned about it. Now, maybe they have better excuses than us, but the people would come late to the synagogue.
Watches, they also wouldn't know when is it going to be dark.
Yeah, but you can always see.
But you don't know within 5 or 10 minutes when you actually have to be there. Nor do you know when the Chazan's going to start within 5 or 10 minutes.
You said
that's why they do repetition, so they know that's what they're dominating.
Yeah, but the repetition was more to be for the people who are not learned, to be able to people not be able to pray. You have the farmers that come to synagogue. We want everybody in active in the included in the Jewish life. So therefore, we would. That's why they said the Chazara. So now they say like this: in the days of the Chazal, the synagogues were outside the yishuv. It was not in the city where everybody lived. It was outside, and the nights, and it would seem that a lot of people, so Friday night, people would come to synagogue to pray Friday night. The rabbis were concerned that maybe the people that would come late, they will not conclude their Amidah, they would be late, the synagogue will finish, they will be alone, and people they might be in danger. People might become the robbers or different things to attack them. So therefore the rabbi said, we want to lengthen the amount of time that people will be in shul to give time for these people to catch up. So when the Chazan is saying this extra prayer, so to speak, this extra bracha, give people time to catch up, so therefore they can leave the synagogue together. Now, so that's what the Gemara wants to say. So really, you should not need to say the bracha at all. So therefore, because you shouldn't need to say the bracha at all, so therefore, the rabbis did not institute that you have to mention Yom. Now you're going to say it on Friday night. Now that it's Yom Tov, the rabbis did not require you to go ahead and say yes.
Is that why you don't say that they Shava at a temporary minyan? Because people weren't necessarily in the fields. If you're at a temporary minyan, nobody was in the fields. It's somewhere else.
Right, so very good. You say temporary minyan, we say like at least for, I think there's different opinions on it. We don't, Ashkenazim for sure don't. That I mean, you only say a minyan if you have a minyan that's in a synagogue. That's where you go in and you say this extra bracha. But let's say you make a minyan in your house Friday night. And your house is not a regular synagogue. It's not like every week they pray there. Everybody, your house is not, so you're not, then they didn't institute this blessing. The blessing was instituted when you're going out of to a synagogue, out, but if you're doing it in your house, not in a synagogue, where there was never a concern of people having this issue. So therefore, certain communities, they will not say this bracha on a Friday night. You know, if you have it, like when we make the Shabbat yeshiva in my mother-in-law's house, Shabbatons, right? We do not say this bracha when we have the minyan in the house. Correct. But over here the Gemara says Yom Hu shenet chaya ba'arba tefilot. But the day of Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah, it's a real obligatory prayer, the Ne'ilah. It's a part and parcel of, you're obligated to pray Ne'ilah. If you're obligated to pray Ne'ilah, you have to mention Shabbat. A prayer, if you're obligated to do that prayer, you have to mention Shabbat. Obligated to pray Musaf, you have to mention Hanukkah. But this prayer of Me'in Shalosh, this prayer that we say on Friday night, really, there's really no real obligation to that prayer to begin with. This whole prayer we instituted because of an outside reason, because we want people to be safe. And therefore, they didn't require you to mention Yom Tov. Okay, I want to wish everyone a great day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Have a great day. Ralph, Asaf, have a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.